Welcome to the technical submission tutorial for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund RDOF long-form process. This tutorial addresses the Stage 2 detailed technical submission that applicants are required to submit with their long-form applications by Tuesday, February 16th. We will use the term technical submission or submission to hereafter to refer to this Stage 2 technical submission. Today, we are providing guidance and explanations regarding components of your technical submission application. This guidance is provided to help you, the applicant, to successfully meet the Auction 904 requirements. Each long-form applicant is ultimately responsible for submitting sufficient information to demonstrate to Commission staff that it is technically qualified to meet the relevant Auction 904 public interest obligations. This tutorial should not be viewed as a substitute for reviewing all orders, public notices, rules, and policies regarding RDOF Phase 1 support and Auction 904. Commission decisions adopting rules and policies for RDOF and Auction 904, as well as detailed public notices outlining the procedures, terms, and conditions for the auctions, are controlling. These documents can be found on the Auction 904 website and through the FCC's Electronic Document Management Systems eDocs database. This tutorial does not supersede or modify any of the orders, public notices, rules, or policies that have been or will be adopted by the Commission for RDOF and Auction 904. Moreover, the long-form applicant is responsible for demonstrating that it is technically qualified to meet the relevant Auction 904 public interest obligations. Official decisions regarding an applicant's eligibility to be authorized to receive Auction 904 support will be made after Commission staff have reviewed the long-form applications. Commission staff may contact you if they have questions or need more information. The tutorial is organized into 4 sections. The first section provides an overview of general principles for completing your technical submission. The second section contains significant highlights for each technology group. The third section contains relevant observations and significant cautions for completing individual portions of your technical submission. Again, to be clear, completing Section 3 requires all components be covered. Further, we emphasize that Sections 1 through 3 apply to all technologies. Finally, the 4th section contains additional details regarding the fixed wireless and satellite technology questions. The first and most important point is that this technical submission is a document written from one engineer to another engineer. That is, the target audience for your technical submission is the FCC Engineering Subject Matter Experts, SMEs. They understand modern IP-based broadband networks using fiber, DOCSIS, DSL, 5G, gigabit terrestrial fixed wireless, and or GEO, MIMO, LEO satellite systems. This encompasses the network architecture, design, implementation, operation, and optimization. Commission SMEs Also understand associated offered services, including IP-based data, voice and video services, their implementation, performance metrics, monitoring, and management. Second, applicants should use technically valid and precise terminology for technical descriptions. We expect these documents to use precise language consistently and throughout their submission. For example, we look for terms such as DSCP, DiffServ, TOS, and not general statements such as priority or QoS. Another example is that we look for OSPF, ISIS, EIGRP, BGP, instead of simply stating routing protocols. Lastly, as an example, we look for specific terms such as MPLS, VPLS, VLANs, instead of stating a general traffic management term. Applicants should use precise and professional language for all technical, project management, network diagrams, performance, and network management descriptions. Third, your technical submission is a forward-looking, future-oriented document covering the 10-year span of the RDOF program. It should include breakdowns showing projected milestones on an annual basis and achievement of all interim service milestones. Thus, where applicable in your submission, you should note items such as future possible vendors or interconnection providers if applicable. Second, proposed actions and plans for increasing capacity as the number of consumers increases over the 10-year period. And three, how your network will continue to meet performance requirements as the number of consumers increases and their data application demands change. Fourth, the scope of your technical submission covers the complete network, not just the technology used in the access or last mile portion of the network. Thus, it is essential that the applicant specifically and separately describe all three generally accepted layers or levels of the network model. This is also known as a hierarchical internetworking model, with the three layers being access, distribution, and core. The core, for the purposes of the submission, includes multiple distributed or centralized subsystems, for example, internet interconnection, switching and gateways, network operations and controls, and data and voice servers. For the purposes of this submission, the following terms can be used interchangeably to describe the network layers. Last mile is equivalent to local loop or access layer. Middle mile or backhaul is equivalent to distribution layer. Core is equivalent to internet connection, interconnection, internet access, and other subsystems. The applicant must describe the application server switching subsystems, protocols, topologies, technologies, software, hardware, and other design techniques associated with each layer. Lastly, there are significant control and management systems such as wireless IMS or multimedia systems that are essential for successful network operations that do not easily pigeonhole into a specific layer. These areas must be addressed in an applicant's technical submission. Fifth, this technical submission is more detailed than your original short form submission and should be approached differently. The long form is similar to a detailed actual network design. It is intended to provide a detailed design, low-level design, as planned for network launch and incremental expansion annually, and meeting all interim service milestones for all required locations. However, it is not the same as a detailed deployment plan that details every device, all configurations, locations, and other such detailed actual build instructions. 6. When answering questions, we encourage you to review the FCC template provided at the following website, https://www.fcc.gov/auction/904. The use of this template is not required, but following such outline will help to ensure that you answer all questions and provide answers in a uniform format. This will allow the FCC technical staff to review your submission efficiently and effectively. The following are additional points applicants should consider when answering the questions or other requirements. The public notice requires an applicant to submit a detailed description and network diagram for each state or territory included in its winning bids. Each requirement, question, and sub-question should be answered completely with precision language in its entirety, independent of other question or requirement. Applicable information for multiple questions should be repeated in each question and should not be referenced. On occasion, portions of an answer for one question will be applicable to another question and therefore should also be used to answer another question. The answer for each question should stand on its own and be repeated, not just referenced. This approach eliminates interpretation errors and reduces processing time. If your submission includes multiple technologies or locations, winning bid areas, in answering a question pertinent to all these technologies, it is preferable and clearer to address each technology in separate sequential paragraphs. This technology separation approach should be used for each winning bid area within a state if there are different access, local loop, distribution, middle mile or backhaul, core, internet interconnection, and other subsystems. Thus, if your submission is for one or more separate winning bid areas, they should be provided in separate paragraphs or a separate section as needed. 7th, your answers should list the significant hardware and software vendor names that you are using or proposing to use now or in the future. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of every piece of hardware and software you are using. Rather, the major ones you are using now or planning for. This practice should be used throughout the document where applicable. We prefer hardware and software information described in each question separately rather than one large list that references the questions where the equipment is used. While you may include this larger consolidated list if you wish, our request is that applicable significant equipment be listed in each separate question as appropriate. Additionally, any submitted vendor data sheets will not be interpreted by our technical staff, and the applicant should not only reference the specific attribute, but also explain the specific attributes in the specific questions as applicable. 8th, you should note that in addition to answering the questions or other submission requirements, applicants can augment their application with additional materials. Such additional material or documents should be pertinent and should be fully explained in your technical submission, not simply referenced. You can certainly copy and paste from these other documents, and we would encourage you to do so, provided such extracted information is blended in cohesively and helps to fully and succinctly answer the question. We expect that any significant inclusion of other material be credited or attributed. Please remember that your design must be specific to your network. Inclusion of other material of a general nature is acceptable for reference. However, generic network information is not the same as the design of your network implementation. As indicated above, this guidance and the following does not modify or supersede the requirements adopted in the RDOF Report and Order or the Auction 904 Procedures Public Notice. Those documents provide the minimum requirements. Section 2. Highlights, Network Technology and Systems Design. The high-level design section is intended to provide a succinct summary of the detailed design, the network diagram, and answers to questions. Applicants should address each technology and geographic area as required by the questions and other requirements. For example, a network architecture description should include all network layers, including the network core, internet connections and other core subsystems, distribution, middle mile and backhaul, and access layer, last mile. Such description should align to and reference the network diagram. This design description should clarify pertinent and common network information. Submission highlights. The long form requires more detail and specifics as compared to the short form. This is a forward-looking, future-oriented document for the 10-year RDOF program period. The scope for most questions is all three layers, which are the last mile access, middle mile backhaul, distribution, and internet access and other subsystems, core, network levels. Answer each question completely and independently. Use precise technical terms and terminology. Technological highlights. It is critical to describe the distribution and core network layer as completely as the access layer. Ensure peak periods are used for all performance management, network capacity, and latency requirements for all network layers. Ensure the network diagram is complete, sufficiently detailed, and includes all three network layers and geographic variations. Ensure that significant hardware and equipment is used at all network layers are addressed as required. All items apply to all states and technologies. Section 3. Network Component Comments. It is important to understand that although some of the questions asked may be less comprehensive in the long-form application than in the short-form application, that does not mean that your long-form answers should be less detailed. Indeed, the opposite is expected. That is, all of your answers should be at a more detailed level and more specific in nature. It is hoped that applicants have learned from their experience in the short-form submission process that the FCC SMEs expect answers that demonstrate engineering proficiency. These long-form answers should have a solid technical foundation and at a detailed level that a fellow network engineer understands and can use to understand their network. For the 2018 Connect America Phase 2 auction, long-form applicants were similarly required to provide detailed technology submissions. Based upon lessons learned from reviewing those submissions, we describe information missing from these submissions that often prompted commission staff to follow up with applicants to request clarifications or additional details. Network layers. Applicants that provide insufficient detail regarding their intended network's layers failed to describe in detail all three generally accepted network layers of access, last mile, distribution, middle mile backhaul, and core internet access and other systems in the submission. Many times, these submissions concentrated on the last mile. A submission focused on the last mile will fail to provide the FCC subject matter experts, SMEs, with sufficient information to evaluate the applicant's network and ability to meet RDOF performance requirements over the 10-year program. Each network layer description should detail the protocols, topologies, application servers, switching subsystems, technologies, software, hardware, configuration guidelines, and other implementation techniques. Voice services. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding their intended voice services failed to clearly state and describe which voice service methodology will be used. First, internally provided. Second, use a managed voice service provider, MSP or MVSP. Third, use a voice over the top service. Or fourth, use another type of voice service. Failed to describe the proposed architecture, design, and implementation that will be used to support voice services, especially when selecting an MSP or MVSP, voice over the top provider, or other hosted voice service. This includes description of such items as CPE, quality of service, traffic engineering, and associated protocols and technologies, voice protocols, trunks, gateways, and interconnections. Failed to sufficiently describe their voice solutions interface and/or access to the PSTN, Public Switch Telephone Network. Failed to describe voice processing on any wireless subsystem, including last mile fixed terrestrial access. Scalability. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding the scalability of their intended networks failed to describe future growth requirements, plans, and capabilities. This is generally associated with the applicant's capacity planning. Failed to detail the applicant's growth projections and assumptions. Failed to clearly state when and under what conditions applicants will increase capacity, and what applicants will measure to determine when to increase capacity and the target level or trigger values. This is generally associated with the applicant's capacity control. Failed to consider how the applicants will scale to meet peak period requirements. Availability and reliability. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding their intended network's availability and reliability. Failed to describe how the applicant's design as a combination of protocols, topologies, redundancy, failover, backup, multipath, multi-home, and multi-link strategies will ensure end-to-end network reliability and availability. Failed to describe how their reliability and availability designs are used in all three network layers of access, last mile, distribution, middle mile, and core, internet interconnection and other systems. Infrastructure ownership. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding the ownership of the infrastructure they intend to use. Failed to mention when additional transit services or other network resources are used in whole or in part, or are part of the capacity plans to support future growth. Failed to ensure ownership information is reflected in network diagrams and vice versa. Design rules of thumb. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding their intended design method, that is, rules of thumb, failed to understand that these rules of thumb and engineering assumptions are forward-looking for how the applicant will size their network over the 10-year program period. Failed to provide rules of thumb and assumptions for multiple resources in the network to include links, router network nodes, software capabilities and licenses, and vendor or managed service providers that are used. Failed to consider and describe all three network layers: access, last mile, distribution, middle mile, and core, internet connection and other subsystems. Failed to describe how assumptions and calculations reflect peak period requirements now and over the 10-year program period. Failed to clearly describe the design methodology, rules of thumb, and peak period assumptions that the applicant intends to use, and the associated calculation and any supporting data in their capacity planning. Peak period performance paths. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding their intended peak period performance paths failed to provide information based upon peak period requirements. Failed to fully answer the question, that is, insufficient detail to describe the end-to-end path the answer requires because the applicant believes the question requires too much detail. Failed to describe the path from the consumer premise to the core internet interconnection through all links, network devices, and how the path is impacted by protocols, topologies, redundancy, and other network design factors along the end-to-end path. Failed to clearly understand that the question does not ask that all paths be described, rather that the applicant detail a few of the consumer use cases where there are significant differences in the path. If the applicant has a small network with standardized network implementation, then it is likely the applicant will describe a single path. Applicants with multiple states, locations, technologies, topologies, middle mile backhaul network segments, and multi-core internet connections will require several use case path descriptions. Fail to understand what constitutes a different path. Different paths can include wireless versus fiber last mile, using different middle mile infrastructures, connections to different internet service providers, and other similar use cases. Project plan. Applicants that provided insufficient detail regarding their project plans failed to include information that is sufficiently detailed, failed to provide sufficient milestones that are specific regarding details such as what, where, when, and deployment numbers. Service milestones should be provided at a minimum in quarterly period breakout. Failed to provide location deployment numbers in terms of absolute values and percent of completion to meet commission build-out requirements for interim service milestones. Note, applicant can submit MS project files if they wish. This is not required, but the commission SMEs will be able to review these types of files. We understand that if this type of information is submitted, it could be a downsized or abbreviated version. The applicant bears ultimate responsibility for submitting project files well in advance of any applicable deadline. Applicants will see an error message when they upload the MS project file to the long-form application. The error will not prevent the long-form applicants from submitting their applications, provided the submission occurs prior to the deadline. Commission staff would still be able to access the file, but they will contact you if there are any issues with the file. Network management. Applicants that provided insufficient details regarding their intended network management failed to consider that network management systems, NMS, are a mixture of personnel, organizations, software, equipment, and processes, then failed to detail these separate elements in their answer. Failed to describe the trained personnel, Network Operations Center, NOC, other trained resources and organizations that will support their data and voice management and network operations. Failed to describe if they use an overall organizing framework for these management resources such as FCAP, ITIL, SIEM, or other methodologies. Failed to list specific NMS hardware and software that form a significant portion of their NMS system at all three network layers, voice management, and monitoring systems. Failed to understand that the question, quote, will maintain the performance and quality of service, close quote, is about the network performance and quality, not the quality of their NMS systems. That is, the applicant has answered the incorrect question. We want the applicant to describe its plan to ensure ongoing and long-term performance and quality of service will be maintained. Capacity management, traffic engineering, and quality of service are potential parts of this process. Failed to describe network management at all three network layers: access, last mile, distribution, middle mile backhaul, and core, internet access and other subsystems. Failed to clearly indicate their NMS organization as being internal or external, and if external, management, the name of the current, projected, or future NMS managed service provider, and the specific network components or systems. Failed to describe how they will measure their network performance to ensure that it will meet the RDOF and commission requirements for the RDOF 10-year program period. Network diagram. We will now discuss the detailed network diagram that must be included in the technical submission. Network diagrams must be certified by a professional engineer. For the purpose of this requirement, while it is not necessary that the professional engineer certifying the network have a professional engineer license, the certification or supplemental appendix should describe the professional engineer's qualifications. This must show the certifier's network experience is readily apparent. For example, a technically focused resume with emphasis on modern IP-based broadband networks. This could include the engineer's expertise in areas such as architecture, design, implementation, operation, optimization, management, and performance management, along with voice operations. The professional engineer must certify that, open quote, network is capable of delivering to at least 95% of the required number of locations in each relevant state, voice and broadband service combination that meets the requisite performance requirements, close quote. Diagrams should include all network technologies such as wireline, wireless, satellite, and other subsystems as applicable. Diagrams must include access, last mile, distribution, middle mile backhaul, and core, internet access, and other subsystem layers of the network. Diagrams must include service enabling and other key subsystems such as data, voice, PSTN, DHCP, DNS, and other supporting systems and subsystems. The diagram should reflect all national, regional, state, tribal, and local areas with locations to be serviced. Applicants should include all the requested elements in the network diagram or diagram series. Note that paragraph 309 of the auction procedures public notice includes 6 subparagraphs that describe the network diagram requested elements. Diagrams should serve as a depiction of the entire network for both broadband data and voice as described by the network design section. The diagram should not be a simplistic, high-level block diagram. Where different technologies share resources such as description, distribution, middle mile backhaul, core internet access and other systems, links and network devices, these technologies must be shown on the same diagram so that the Commission SMEs can fully understand and visualize the various loads on shared resources. Format for submitting network diagrams. Applicants by default can submit diagrams in file formats of .txt, .doc, .docx, .csv, .pdf, .odt, .xls, and .xlsx with a 10 megabit size or less to the Commission submission website. If desired, the applicant may provide clear and readable PDF diagrams, network diagrams. Unfortunately, the Commission has found in many cases that the typical cut and paste of graphic images into PDF files often results in poor quality and are often unreadable or unclear if not done carefully. Applicants may also submit some alternative file formats other than the standard types accepted by the ISAS tool, including .vsd, .vdx, .vsdx, and .png, and .jpeg. Visio files that contain network diagrams will be accepted if the applicant wishes to use this format. To be very clear, this is optional. It is not required. The applicant may also submit high-quality image files independently without embedding in PDF. Again, this is optional if desired by the applicant. It is the applicant's responsibility to submit alternative file formats well in advance of any applicable deadlines. Applicants will see an error message when they upload such alternative files to the long-form application. The error will not prevent the long-form applicants from submitting their applications, provided that the submission occurs prior to the deadline. Commission staff should still be able to access the file, but they will contact you if there are any issues with the file. Applicants may submit layered diagrams or diagram overlays to aid in their presentation of required elements in their network diagram. For example, one diagram where the same network devices are shown, and then a separate layer can show link speeds, and another diagram layer with devices showing protocols, or a third diagram layer showing primary versus backup links, etc. Please remember that layering, such as this, is optional. Section 4. Guidance for fixed wireless and satellite applicants. Fixed wireless networks. We will now focus on certain areas that applicants intending to use terrestrial fixed wireless should address in more detail in the long-form application. Herein are some of the topics to note. Note: all of the tips and guidance provided in earlier sections of this tutorial apply to fixed wireless networks and any wireless subsystem supporting other last-mile technologies, for example, fiber. Recommended guidelines for voice and broadband coverage maps are provided in the Wireless Coverage Maps data specification posted on the Auction 904 website under the Education tab. When creating these maps, an applicant should consider that coverage includes both downstream and upstream and varies based on base station and CPE parameters and the frequency band. An applicant should also consider that associated capacity is sensitive to propagation, channel bandwidth, and the number of channels per sector. Fixed wireless network coverage maps should include corresponding speeds with projected annual deployment and explanation of how the deployment will achieve all interim service milestones to all required locations. Propagation model descriptions should demonstrate, among other things, applicability to broadband terrestrial fixed wireless networks and propagation models. Model descriptions should include frequency bands, including mid-band and MM-wave channel bandwidths and antenna heights on or at the base station and CPE locations. Spectrum should be identified for any wireless segment in the network with specificity regarding the frequency bands, channel bandwidth for each sector. An applicant should also include explanation of sufficient spectrum access for annual deployment and to achieve all interim service milestones to all required locations. Capacity and coverage should be provided for annual deployment and for each interim service milestone on site and sector basis with the associated number of locations at each time. All calculations should be provided at cell edge during peak periods. Latency performance should be based on round-trip delay from the CPE to the network edge beyond the internet access point and back. The latency should be provided at peak periods and for each segment. In computing peak periods capacity and speed for each milestone and the proposed number of locations, all assumptions, justifications, and detailed calculations must be included for each frequency band and associated access technology. For example, metrics such as latency, oversubscription ratio, channel bandwidth modulation, and coding schemes, traffic schedulers, and backhaul attributes should be fully explained with appropriate assumptions and calculations for each frequency band and associated technologies. Satellite networks, NGSO specifics. To aid the long-form review of satellite submissions, satellite-based long-form applicants operating non-geostationary NGSO constellations should provide information tailored to reflect the multi-satellite nature of their system. For example, note, all of the tips and guidance provided in earlier sections of this tutorial apply to satellite networks and any satellite subsystems supporting other last-mile technologies. When describing how much satellite capacity the applicant plans to reserve, the applicant should state how much capacity coverage over the service area is reserved for each required location. References to user beams should refer to specified satellites over the service area. Regarding the reallocation of the beams, a multi-satellite NGSO system should describe how satellite capacity is reallocated when a satellite in the constellation is no longer available for service to the service area because of interference protection or when a satellite moves out of the coverage area. In addition, the applicant should demonstrate how it intends to accommodate space and terrestrial weather issues that may arise. When describing the build-out of the NGSO system, the applicant should discuss in detail how it will fulfill all coverage requirements annually and how it will achieve all interim service obligations to all required locations. When describing uplink and downlink gateway antenna beams, the applicant should indicate how many are required to meet the latency data rate under peak load conditions. The applicant should also explain how the network will achieve the required speeds at all locations under peak load conditions. When describing CPE plans, the applicant should provide a detailed description of plans for mass CPE deployment, manufacture, and development in order to meet the applicant's commitments. Conclusion. As noted at the beginning of this tutorial, the information we have provided today is meant to provide further explanation for the guidance provided by the Commission about the technical components of your long-form submission. This tutorial does not supersede or modify any of the orders, public notices, rules, or policies that have been or will be adopted by the Commission for the RDOF and Auction 904. Moreover, the long-form applicant is responsible for demonstrating that it is technically qualified to meet the relevant Auction 904 public interest obligations. Official decisions regarding the applicant's eligibility to be authorized to receive Auction 904 support will be made after Commission staff has reviewed the long-form application. Commission staff may contact you if they have questions or need more information. If you have any questions, please email auction904@fcc.gov. Thank you for watching this tutorial and participating in Auction 904.